Amen. 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 This is Jason Reed Pratt, author of Cry of Justice. Have you been wishing I would skip over explaining what I'm doing in horrible impersonations of Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill, and just instead fast forward through my turns with a few specific explanations because I've already demonstrated clearly how the rules work from Mark Kermon's board game Churchill, published by GMT Games? Me too! Fortunately, by now I have illustrated how almost all the rules and procedures work. Whereas, unfortunately, there isn't as much flexible narrative variation, so to speak, in how the players interact with each other during the conference phase, not as much as I was expecting. That's simply a function of the same limited set of topics being chewed over again and again. I don't mean that as a criticism against the game design. I only mean that even I'm getting bored trying to represent my thoughts on this repeating topical wheel as a narrative progression. So, let's start with a few pre-turn error adjustments. First, Churchill let the power of having control of both the European and Pacific theaters go to his head, and so accidentally added one too many naval supports to his China-Burma-India front. Zip, that one has to be deleted. Second, Stalin let the power of being Stalin, and actually punching through Manchuria, go to his head, and forgot to eliminate one of the Japanese army reserves last turn after he finished thrashing it. No self-respecting dictator should refuse to shoot prisoners. So, zip! Off to Siberia with their heads. Third, Churchill let the power of controlling both of the etceteras distract him so much in the European theater that when the Italians removed his sole offensive support on the Mediterranean front, he forgot that his front still had an inherent 2 power, and so still had a minimum chance to advance. Consequently, if I roll a 1 or 2 on this 10-sided die, he'll get into Sicily. But a 6, so that doesn't happen. There is one more error I'll have to fix from last turn, but that'll be a little later. Normally I would do a recap of last turn and the current situation here, but instead, just look at this map for about 5 seconds, and then here's the current score, with the United States in blue and the United Kingdom in green. The Soviet Union is currently in first place with 38 points, but the United Kingdom is currently winning in second place with 33 points. Because Stalin is more than 20 points ahead of last place, so Winston is leading a coalition with the U.S., totaling 43 points against Stalin's 38. The U.K. and USSR are close enough, however, that they are continually jostling for the second-place win condition, for now. On even-numbered turns, the players' staff decks don't reshuffle, so once I flip over the standard production chips, which I prefer to activate early instead of later in the decision segment, it's time to flip the event deck over and draw off last turn to reveal Turn 4, November 1943, the Cairo Conference, codenamed Sextant. Historial variant, B. Historial? Did I say historial variant? Winston this turn must dedicate one production to the Hump Project. The Hump Project in real life amounted to nothing, but was an ambitious attempt to build a B-29 superfortress base across the Himalayas into China, in striking distance of the Japanese home islands. The base was constructed, but it was impossible to feasibly bring supplies, and especially fuel, into the base except by aircraft, the B-29 itself having the only feasible range. So a bomber had to bring in fuel not only for other bombers to use in flying across China and also into Japan and back, but also enough fuel for the fueling bomber to cross back over the Himalayas to restock on supplies for the base. As you might expect, this meant barely enough fuel was brought over to do anything with, and eventually the project was abandoned as the Western Allies advanced into the Pacific. In this game, the Hump Project merely translates into an increased chance of moving the CBI front forward. Stalin will be inactive at this conference due to Chiang Kai-shek's presence. He won't be able to advance topics, and his presence won't help or hamper his staff, but he can still debate topics on the defense. Chiang was a chief warlord of China at the time and not a big fan of communism. Stalin naturally wanted a communist ally to take control of the country, which eventually happened after the war. The United States has to put up with Stilwell training the Chinese army, meaning Roosevelt must dedicate one of his productions to the CBI front. In real life, this wouldn't be so much of a problem, but in the game, the United States only gets points from the CBI front if it enters Japan, along with Churchill getting the same 8 points. Churchill is focusing here because he can score points by himself alone for advancing close enough. Winston does get one setback from the pre-November events. He won't get a free partisan network at the start of the war phase due to the Axis-Turkey negotiations. Last, the partisan event. This time partisan chips might be removed instead of placed. A single roll of a 6-sided die could trigger this, but it barely misses with a 4, so the players are safe. With the pre-agenda card business out of the way, it's time for me to role-play the players as they draw their staff for this turn and decide on who to sacrifice, so to speak, to set the agenda. For this purpose, it doesn't matter who goes first, so I just run left to right for convenience. Skipping over my player rationales, I still have to pause here for Stalin's paranoia roll and to explain a leftover error from last turn. Well, actually 2 errors. Take a look at Stalin's Chiefs of Staff card, Marshal Zhukov. You should remember from prior turns that Chiefs of Staff get a star instead of a strength, basically meaning they're so politically powerful that they can feasibly oppose their leader from turn to turn. No small feat in Soviet Russia, but this is Marshal Zhukov, who merits the nickname Man of Steel, Stalin, more than Stalin himself does. I've been rolling up the Chief's strengths when I first draw them during a turn, but that's a mistake. The rules say I am only supposed to roll the strength once I commit the card to being played somewhere. The rule does allow me to change my mind about how exactly I'm going to play the card after the roll if I'm using it to advance a topic. But otherwise, that's the risk in playing such cards. I can't know in advance how much the chief will help or oppose the player. I didn't realize this yet when starting this turn, so this will be the last turn I continue the error by rolling Zhukov now. For a 5, which is very nice. Now, when I've drawn Stalin's staff cards each turn, I'm supposed to roll 2 dice for paranoia, but I forgot to do that last turn. So to balance out, this turn I'll check twice. A total of 2, 3, or 4 will trigger it, and unfortunately I not only roll a 3, but I do that on my first roll, which means I haven't risked paranoia twice yet to make up for my skip on turn 3. Consequently, I'll have to roll twice again next turn. Stalin's paranoia effect means that everyone's natural strength, including whatever Zhukov rolls, goes down 1 point before any card text buffs or debuffs are factored in. But the base strength can never be less than 1. I'm not entirely sure I played this rule correctly, this being my first time it has triggered in the game, but there's no good way for me to adjust next time if I haven't. Skipping on then to revealing the staff picks to set the agenda, and Roosevelt clearly wins it, even with Britain buffing up their pick with imperial agenda power. After the discussions and debates back and forth, we've got this result. Notice that Churchill and Roosevelt are tied for the number of topics they've won. This triggers one of the tiebreaker rules that we haven't seen before. If 2 or 3 players tie on the number of topics they've won, keeping in mind that any topic center table cannot count as having been won by anyone for this purpose, then starting from Stalin clockwise, each player has an opportunity to play their leader card. The first one to play it gets to decide how to break the tie. So Stalin and then Roosevelt have priority here over Churchill. A leader cannot be played if he is inactive and or if he has debated already, however. And Stalin started off inactive this conference. Also, he debated a point by proxy, so even if he had been active, he couldn't be played now. If either of the other players play their leader to break the tie, their leader has to risk the health roll. Stalin doesn't have a health roll to risk. FDR might die and be replaced by Truman, but under the circumstances, this wouldn't be a bad thing because the Western Allies are probably going to finish the Trinity Project this turn, and that gives Truman some buffs. Churchill only risks having to be inactive the next turn, which a card draw might force anyway. Consequently, there is little risk for Churchill to play his card. Both leaders are still active, so FDR might as well play himself to break the tie. He rolls totally safe from a stroke, and survives to play again next turn. Had no player played a leader to break the tie for whatever reason, the United States player would get to use his arsenal of democracy power to decide the tie, no doubt in his favor. So if FDR had passed, Churchill would necessarily have to play himself or cede the tie to FDR in any case. FDR wins the conference, and so also wins the 3-point victory chip. Next turn I'll start tracking those victories on the board for visual clarity and counting the score. The decision segment now starts with what I like to call Part 0, where I score FDR 3 points for winning the conference, bringing his total to 13. Everyone chooses where to place the directed offenses they've won, starting with Churchill clockwise from the conference winner. At around this time I find I have somehow generated 3 extra dice on the board. How? No idea. Blip, they're gone. Conditional issues are placed next, but we didn't discuss the remaining one, the second front, to open Normandy. Extra production chips are now dealt out to the players. While strategic materials was proposed, FDR basically forced the tie by playing his last card on this chip, moving it off the center of the table. He still gets his extra production from it, but no one else does. Everyone gets extra production only if the chip ends the conference in the center of the table. The Arctic front still has enough naval support, so Stalin does still get his Arctic production chip. FDR won the conference, so starting clockwise from Churchill this turn, each player now spends their production. Some things to note. Due to card events and directed offenses, Britain's CBI front is pretty supercharged this turn. Stalin is still concentrating on his Far East fight against Japan, but he spent production this turn on preparing for the naval invasion, so his chances of moving forward against the Imperial reserves this turn are reduced. Roosevelt had to spend quite a bit of effort on the CBI front, but he spent a good bit of the rest of it on preparing to get his Central Pacific front to catch up with Southwest Pac. This was the first time that nuclear research had been discussed that someone other than Stalin won it, so Stalin does not get 3 more points automatically. But Churchill, who did win it, diplomatically devoted one of his production chips to helping finish the research. FDR matched that contribution, but since he had earned 2 free naval supports he couldn't use anywhere else, he used them to stock up on the Atlantic front, and he thought he should put his last production chip toward helping win Bolero this turn. No one discussed global issues this turn, although FDR did discuss and win back Pacific leadership, so he got some extra benefit from winning that, even though Winston still picked up the usual production profit from leading at the start of the turn. This brings us to A-bomb research, where the Western Allies only need to roll anything except a 1 to win this time, which they won! It continued to fall onto 2. Clearly, loaded capitalist dice is specially created for this purpose. This not only opens up the first of several game-ending requirements, already on turn 4, it also gives 3 points each to the United States and the UK, bringing Churchill to 36 and Roosevelt to 16. And it takes away 3 points from the USSR, bringing Stalin down to 35. And it permanently removes this topic from the rest of the game, leaving Stalin no more opportunities to score free points from it. But he did already get 9 points so far. This also changes the game again because now last place, America, is 20 points or less behind first place, currently Britain. So second place, currently the Soviets, cannot claim the second place rule. Churchill and Stalin will have to be careful from here out not to score too much in their quest to get ahead of each other, or they'll get too far ahead of the United States again and give the win to whoever is in second. Everyone now gets their free partisanship for this turn, except for Great Britain due to the card's Axis event. Stalin places his in the colony of Siam. Siam? I'm not sure. Increasing his score 1 point to 36. And reducing Churchill's score by 2 points to 34, because that's one more colony no longer free of influence. FDR decides he'd rather increase his score directly and prepare to place a political chip if he gets one, rather than fool around in the colonies where only Churchill can place political chips right now anyway. So he puts his partisan chip in France, increasing his score by 1 point to 17. With everyone set, the war automatically kicks off for the season as Germany makes its adjustments. 1 reserve automatically to the Eastern Theater, removing an offense chip that Stalin had won during the conference. The Kriegsmarine goes out to eat a naval support again. The Western Front hasn't entered either Bolero or Normandy yet, so 4 more reserves go out to blunt Stalin's advance, and to wonder why they haven't steamrolled over Stalingrad and won the war in the East yet. The Italians move up to help defend Sicily, removing 1 offense from the front there. And the Germans roll randomly to place their last reserve against Stalin again, which is a total waste for the Nazis right now, but that's how the dice roll. Stalin's front has no chance to move at all. Franklin needs a 4 or less to win, but he plops a 7. Winston needs a 2 or less, and rolls an 8. Nothing there, the Italians and Germans go back to their wine and cheese. Down to the Pacific Theater, no one is entering Japan. 2 reserves go up to minimize Stalin's chances. No front is entering a B-29 space. The Imperial Navy holds back again. And the last reserve goes to the Caroline Islands. If you're wondering why the reserves are back in Japan when I make this roll, that's because I dumbly rolled the 6-sided die the first time, not the 10-sided. Stalin looks completely out and advances a notch into J-Ho, China. That's a big win under the circumstances. Halfway into the game, he'll only need 2 more wins to add Japan to his score. The U.S. failed to roll for their breakthrough, but they easily advance into the Marshall Islands. However, this doesn't erase the 5 points the other 2 players get for Roosevelt's disbalanced Pacific advance, because the Southwest front rolls a 1, which if you look closely is a 1, not a 7. The 7 is to its right, where it should be. So the Western Allies also advance into Vogelkop, New Guinea. The CBI front is strong enough to automatically advance 1 step, and also to roll for a double step. 4 or less to win. 2. That's the first double step of the game. Stalin's partisanship, having been swept behind the advancing front, now goes back in the bag, for now, reducing his score by 1 to 35, and increasing Churchill's by 2 for a clean colony to 36. With that, the war phase and the turn is done. The United States remains in last place for now, but has advanced nicely to 17 points. This is not more than 20 points behind the leader, so normal scoring applies. Stalin and Churchill are running neck and neck at 35 and 36 respectively, Winston in a 1-point lead. In effect, since last turn, the Soviets have dropped 3 points and the United Kingdom has picked them up. I won't take you through my double check of the points this time, but I did double check they're valid. Next turn will start the halfway point of the game, and also 1944, I think. But no matter how things play out, remember this absolute certainty. I will lose twice. Doom, 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 doom. Amen, 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 doom, 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 doom.